before he began his long silence in 1925, he informed the Mandali that he was going to begin keeping silence. One of the teachers, one of his disciples from Ahmednagar, teachers of the Hazrat Babashan school, in that discussion said, but Baba, who will teach us? And Baba made that statement, which has become very well known. I have come not to teach, but to awaken. So then what is all this information that he's given through the years, gradually, bits and pieces? What has that got to do with awakening? There is a great purpose to it. What we are looking at is the external form of that. But nobody has given information like Meher Baba. You won't find anything in recorded history that's close to it. The closest thing we have is perhaps Ibn Arabi and Sufism, a bit of Rumi. In Christianity, Meister Eckhart had given some hints. Otherwise, we don't see things like this. Vedanta has a lot of it, but it is so old that it has become allegorical. Baba began this in the very early days. God Speaks is like the apex of this large font of information that he had given through the years. But in the beginning, you know, he was doing poetry as Homa. And there was one of his early disciples, Sorabji Desai, who was also a poet, who didn't know who this Homa was, but he was reading his poetry and was so inspired, he took the pen name Soma. He came to find out, Baba told some of his disciples, now you send this to him, it's different things. And then they informed him that Meher Baba was Homa. So that relationship began there. This is Mansari's uncle we're speaking of, one of Baba's great early disciples, who was a very well-known author in Gujarati. Baba began writing to him, explaining, beginning with the analogy of the ocean and the drops, and about creation and all that. So Baba began giving these explanations in the early days. Gradually, as you know, he gave little discourses, different things. All of this really started to pick up after he started keeping silence, the great long silence, in July 1925. Suddenly, Baba was, in 3 days, keeping himself in his jhopdi at Meherabode, and they came to find out that he's writing a book. Became known as a secret book of information that humanity has not yet, up to this age, ever received. Simultaneously, now in silence, Baba is communicating by writing himself for a 17-month period. And during that time, while he's communicating by writing, he's writing his secret book. Also, he was giving discourses, usually on Thursday at the home of a disciple in Arangan. They would go there, people would be invited, and it was the one day a week they would have tea with milk in it. So people would come there and Baba would begin giving these fascinating discourses. Of course, when Baba gave discourses, they had enough sense from those early days that they didn't want to miss this. And it was so rich, it couldn't be absorbed completely in just sitting and listening. So there were scribes. Chanji had become one of the disciples then. Ramji was there. He was taking diaries from the beginning. And these records would be kept. So this long period, what we call the first long stay, 1925-26, Baba was giving these explanations. That came to be known then as the intelligence notebooks. At some point, he directed that these intelligence notebooks be handed over to Vishnu and Kaikushu Avsari for editing, because there were also sections of it that were in Farsi. And they needed somebody who was very proficient in Farsi to really accurately record that in these notebooks. Those intelligent notebooks were recorded essentially as a long-form outline. This information was so dense that it was recorded in long-form outline. At the time, as is in academic protocol, there were no signatures of authors. Everybody knew it was Meher Baba's work, and the disciples were simply the copyists. So there was no record. When these things came out later in our time to be edited, there was a question about that. But based upon handwriting and based upon a note in the combined diaries or another diary of Chanji's diaries, I'm not remembering if it's the end of the combined diaries or Chanji's diaries in the following months, I found that hint that Baba had turned it over to them, and it was obvious that it was Vishnu and one other person who was proficient in Farsi. That, in our time, was re-edited as what we know to be combined diary, infinite intelligence, which you have here. It took Ward and Merwan Jesawala, Ward Parks and Merwan Jesawala, 9 years to do this work. And obviously the copyists knew that the persons who had to do the work would have to know the material. They had absolute faith in Baba that the time is right, the right people will be there to do this work. You know, Ward is a scholar in his field. He was made to do this work. And Merwan Jesawala, also one of Baba's old disciples, who had been given work of editing by Baba during his lifetime. So this was all done in that sense. Why do I mention infinite intelligence? Because this is an interesting group of explanations. In those explanations, now they have edited in a certain form, I should say. Baba started giving these discourses, and he might pick any topic. And he would go on, we know, I can tell you from a certain date, August 20th, 1925, it is written in the combined diaries that that day Baba gave them this discourse for hours. The subject, light and dark, original light and original dark, and lightness and darkness, other subjects, perfect masters, sadgurus, different things. All of these things were integrated into that work as that body of intelligence notebooks. But the approach was interesting. Baba in those days explained how God comes into creation and how souls are formed. It's from the perspective of God coming into creation. All how that manifests. The different angles that God in oneness plays off of manyness to go through creation and reach the goal. Fascinating piece of work. Those were recorded in those times. Baba handed that stuff over to be saved. It was not to be published. There was a day in 1926, later towards the end of the first long stay, when one of the Mandalis told Baba, these discourses you've been giving this past year and for so long are just excellent. We should publish them. And without agreeing to that, Baba said, yeah, they're okay. I've been giving you good explanations. As much as you can absorb, they're okay. But nothing compared to what I've written in the book. And I bring that up because people have asked me in the past, and they've said, we're sure that must be the book. I said, well, I've come across this statement in the combined diaries, which to me is proof that it's not yet the book. The next group of explanations Baba gave was to the Meher Ashram boys, beginning in November, December 1927, in that intense period on the hill. Interesting thing, you know, the second long stay we called that began in 1927, Baba was intent on one thing, spiritual training. And part of that spiritual training was continuation of Hazrat Babajan School, which then on May 1st, there were a small group of boys, 10 boys at first, to form Meher Ashram. And gradually, so many people were interested in coming to join Meher Ashram, including the 14 boys from Iran that Baidul had brought in July. That went on, and these discourses began bit by teachers, but then Baba himself began giving discourses. At first, in what we know as the West Tank Room, where the museum is on the hill now. And then Baba went into seclusion. Okay, you recall, we talked about it yesterday. Baba started fasting for 5.5 months during that period. This is all part of his work to take that select group of boys and advance them very rapidly. This is what he explained. The intensification of that work then, of course, happened because he also went into seclusion in the crypt cabin. The crypt cabin had just been built. All of this is in purpose of Meher Ashram developing into Prem Ashram. So these explanations were given at the time. And this group of explanations has recently, also just this past year, been published as the book Creation and Its Causes. That title specifically came from Ramju's diaries, Sobs and Throbs, which was printed in 1929 first, where he suggested that should be the title. He was describing Baba's discourses, explanations to the boys. He said that were so incredible, it could rightly be named Creation and Its Causes. And so the book was named Creation and Its Causes. That's also a wonderful piece of work that Ward has just recently done. That has further explanations, including what we talked about the other night, planetary spiritual evolution. So Baba would make these statements through the years, and sometimes people would try and take quotes from these things because they didn't have time to do whole explanations. Context would sometimes be lost. But now we're getting a larger group of explanations. So if we are patient and take our time to look at these things, we can put the pieces together, and then everything begins to make sense again. Those group of explanations went on. The story of the Meher Ashram, Prem Ashram, is just incredible in itself. If we look at Meher Baba's life and take one little piece, one little section of his work, if he was known only for that thing, he would have been considered still the greatest spiritual master of the 20th century. Nobody in the world in general knows about these things yet. It's only a small group of people who have had that reaction, internal reaction to him. We're not concerned with what the world knows. It's nice. I like it. We're not bothered with crowds. It's okay with me. Why? We're focusing on the one, not the many. That's it. Now in 1929, Rustam asked Baba, the world should be saved. Don't you think, wouldn't it be easier if you just reveal your secret book now? Just let's publish it, and then people will read it, and they'll know the answer, and then all of this business will be over. Baba said, what will they know? What will they know? What would they understand if they read words? They haven't developed the ears to hear and understand that yet. My work is to prepare humanity for the reception of this knowledge. This is all the external form. My work is to patiently prepare humanity for this knowledge, and they can only absorb so much at a time. And we observe that in the history of Baba's explanations. Gradually, he's giving people more and more information. The early explanations, Baba used a lexicon that was relevant to the disciples who were present. And we know that's recorded in that way. Gradually, Baba elucidated. First, there was subtle world and physical world, gross world, subtle world. Then he clarified subtle world is actually a world of energy and a world of mind. So it went from gross, subtle, then he included mental as a separate thing. There's also something, I'm getting into details. This is a God Speaks meeting after all. But in those early days, he used the term fine, which is latent sanskars in mental and beyond, the fine mental. But fine is a word that has too many denotations in language. So that word also had to be defined further. So he stopped using that word so much later. Latent in creation, different explanations. Years went on, Baba traveled to the West. There was also this talk about motion pictures. Baba came here, as you know, that week, first week of June 1932, contacting people in the motion picture business. Baba has said that the medium of motion pictures has tremendous potential to give people messages, true messages, to help them understand spiritual value, spiritual secrets. It had great potential. So in the following years, there were some screenwriters who were also very attracted to Baba, who had become his disciples. And in May of 1934, Baba's disciple From Working Boxwala, Chanji was also there, but From Working Boxwala is a person who at that time mostly recorded these explanations Baba gave at Meherabode in May of 1934. These are also a group of amazing explanations about many things, including the first time Baba explains more in depth about the gaseous forms, 276 gaseous forms, and more detail about that. He also, you'll find those explanations, you won't find a lot of these things in God Speaks, because Baba had already given them. Although they hadn't been published at that time, he had already given these explanations in Creation and its Causes, about the evolution of gas, to the point of the electron being the first manifestation in creation, physically from energy to matter, the electron, the first embodiment of the soul into a form. So there's the objective world of created form and the subjective world of the individual soul reacting against creation. So God is playing all these roles. Why? To experience himself. We say himself. People nowadays, why do you say himself? Why not herself? Well, we can say it's tradition, but there is a principle of that. We won't get into it too much. Only to know that whenever the avatar comes, Baba said he is always in the form of a man, representing from God to creation. And his most important disciple is always a woman, representing all creation and the original principle of duality. So we say God himself. Okay. Those explanations were given in 1934. Baba traveled again to the West, contacted those screenwriters, and there was some action in the next coming years regarding writing these scripts. They had been done. There were notions by some. People had written different styles, and Baba corrected those things. And then all that work stopped. That's all Baba wanted to do at the time. He didn't want to really bring all this through to full fruition, but it was important for people to get involved in that mentally and do that work that had gone on. Then, you know, he began his work with the Mus. All of that was more important. World War II was important. Those seclusions for that. In 1943, Baba wanted to have a meeting at Meherabode to present a specific topic, divine theme. Divine theme is really the principle, the fundamental principle of all of Meher Baba's teachings in a nutshell. It has to do with creation, evolution of consciousness, reincarnation, realization. Baba had Rano Gali, who was one of his close Western disciples, who was a fine artist, come to Meherabode. Meherabode was just beginning that year. It wasn't Meherabode yet. It was just the pimple gown place. Baba had Rano come there with also a few of the other women. She was also there because Baba was doing work there. Won't go into all of that history. But Rano spent a few weeks, 2 or 3, focusing specifically on drawing these charts for divine theme. At that time, these charts were done, explanation was done. Rano did all this, by the way, tediously, by hand. The whole explanation, Baba had dictated the whole explanation on the board. It was all taken down, and she tediously, by hand, copied all this in the margins of the chart. Quite an amazing piece of work. When she had completed that, everything was sent to Bombay. Chanji took it and had it all printed. And there was a beautiful blue velvet jacket that Baba made around these booklets. So when they were brought back and the group of men came, they were all presented personally by Baba. That looked something like this. You have this in your bookstore, divine theme. Now this is a paper, light cardboard cover, to match the look of the original blue velvet. But the size is the same, everything is the same, and the presentation with this tie on there and all that, and you open it up and unfold the charts. Ward did this a few years back to give people an idea of where that came from. So that is there. This meeting was held at Meherabode in May of 1943, and 140 some men were invited to attend. The men were very happy just to spend time with Baba, but Baba had specific work, quite unique. He hadn't done this before with his male disciples. He had these 140 plus men come, introduce them to this divine theme, telling them he wanted them to read this, study, concentrate on the subject, and they were to spend several hours in specific places around Meherabode focusing on the divine theme at specific times. And Baba would go into his jhopri at Lower Meherabode while they were doing this, in silence, all around Meherabode. What was he doing? He was using the focus, the concentration of the men to work towards this awakening through this information. We have the example. Of course, and Baba joked about it, but he was very serious about this, but he would tell jokes. He made a comment, "I'm very happy about what you men have been doing during your period of concentration. I was surprised to even see my brother Jal and Dr. Ghani taking that time to focus and try their best to concentrate. This all helps. Bob would spend time with the men joking and all that, but he really wanted them to really concentrate on divine theme. All that history was written. You can read about it. Time went on, years went on, new life happened, all that. And then there is this issue about further explanations. Before the new life, Baba wanted Dr. Ghani to concentrate on this coming book. So in 1948, Ghani was there, but as you know, Ghani was a little bit lazy. So Baba made Duncan get after him, check his work. And the way Baba was when he sent somebody after somebody else, it was kind of to aggravate them also. You tell him, you make sure, and all that. So that was all done. And we see in the notes, in Ghani's stuff, where Duncan has written notes in the margins, and he's very direct. This should not be like that, and this should represent that, and so on it went. Why? Duncan had just done the Wayfarers. So he had gone through this whole process of publication. And all the while, you know how the Wayfarers happened. Dr. Duncan, a new disciple, on the topic of must, told Baba one day, this is fantastic. Nowhere ever has anybody ever seen such material. This is amazing. Somebody should write this. Baba says, you're right. You're doing it. But in that book, that most rare book, you will see some, in the introduction material, you will never find anywhere else. Baba's discourse on the difference of the minds, the ordinary mind, the mind of the must, and God consciousness. It's absolutely fabulous. Any psychologist has never seen anything like it, guaranteed. Also then, there are introductions, the different types of pilgrims of the path, the different types of musts. Why are all these things important? Because they're not integrated into God Speaks. That had already been published. It's important for people to understand that there is a wide body of work of Meher Baba's explanations. Though we know that God Speaks is considered the apex, it should never be considered the only thing. There are many explanations Baba gave that led up to God Speaks. It went on and on. Ghani, during the new life, died, and this body of work was left there. It was later incorporated into God Speaks as a supplement, for the most part. The portions that were not in the overall 10 chapters, parts, not chapters, parts, parts, were subsequently done as a supplement, just after God Speaks was done. So God Speaks was dictated by Baba. Baba did a lot of this in Dehradun after the Fiery Free Life. They spent that most of 1953 in Dehradun. Baba was dictating then. Initially, Pendu started taking dictation for the original chapters. Baba's approach. What is the first? Okay, the dedication is fantastic to the illusion that sustains reality. That sentence says it so much right there. But it makes a lot of people think, how could that be? So then you start reading and you find out, yes, this is how God manifested. Now the difference in God Speaks, how it's presented. God Speaks is more a story, not from the side of God initially, but the side of the soul on the return journey to God. So it's a slightly different perspective. Things were included in God Speaks. We have paragraphs that were taken from some of the previous messages. There's a paragraph from the highest of the high message. believe there's one from the Final Declaration. These things were integrated into God Speaks. And you know that Bob was just telling Erich, you know that one, put that in there now. So Erich was doing most of this work. To the extent that chapter 10, the conclusion, has the name Erich Jesawala behind it, and not Meher Baba. And so people would ask Erich about God Speaks and whatnot, and he was, well, I don't know, it's in that God Speaks there, you read it. Yeah, Erich, but your name is the author. It is there. It is. He was just doing what Baba told him to do. This is included in the supplement because it was an additional piece of information, but these charts are there, very important. What we want to do is reprint these charts in a large form of at least 4 feet high and whatever the width comes out to be, so that centers everywhere can post them. Baba was the chart walla. Charts all the time. A picture is worth 1,000 words. More than that with Baba's charts. There was another chart that came out, which Rano did, that was included in the subsequent editions of God Speaks. That beautiful chart, very colorful, mural type chart, creation, evolution of consciousness, human reincarnation, involution of consciousness, realization. It's a beautiful thing. One chart can tell the whole story. What will be good about this is Baba actually also then dictated an explanation for divine theme, which he included in discourses as a meditation. In the chapters on meditation, Baba said one important type of meditation is to focus on divine theme. Here's divine theme. So the whole explanation is given as an exercise in meditation. And that is included. What we hope to do is have somebody with a fine voice record that explanation, and people can look at the chart, sit, relax, focus, and listen to the narration of the explanation of divine theme. All of these things will be very helpful. Why? I have come not to teach, but to awaken. You don't have to read God Speaks and all this stuff. What is it then? Baba described it like this. What is all this information? He said, the creation, everything in God Speaks, it's all zero. It's all zero, but I want you to read it anyway. It's why? Because he said it's like this. What is it? Throwing the dog of a mind a bone. If you're Hirulal from Hamirpur, all you need is Avatar Me. Those are very rare people. Very rare. Hamirpur is a rare place, and the few in Hamirpur who are that absorbed are rare. So for the majority of us with ordinary minds, this is also very helpful to help us develop a perspective. It's a great gift of the explanation of the fabric of the universe and the dynamics of the journey back to God. Nothing has been seen like that. Now, after God Speaks was published, people had, of course, more questions because, as Baba said, yeah, I'll give you answers. Every time I give you an explanation, then you have a dozen more questions. And it goes on like that. So in the end, the answer is annihilation of the mind after all. Anyway, certain questions arose, and that book, Beams on the Spiritual Panorama, 12 essays were written to answer those specific questions. It's a beautiful piece of work. That is probably considered to be the last work of Baba on these subjects. Later on, we have when Francis came to live with Baba, Baba continued to give these explanations, and Francis was a new disciple there in Baba's Mandali from 1959. And he looked around at the Mandali and thought, what? He's explaining incredible things here. Is nobody taking this down? And the Mandali, as Baba would say, Baidu would be over there like that, and Pendu would be just, they weren't interested. They've heard it 100 times. It's the same stuff. They're just waiting for the next order. That's it. Anyway, Francis started recording these messages. So by 1962, the end, the East-West Gathering, he had all this bunch of explanations, nicely edited. He handed it over to Bill LePage, who took it to Australia, and it was published as The Everything and the Nothing. So very fine pieces of work in there that are more in the line of discourses rather than what we find in God Speaks and all this metaphysical information. So that basically, in a nutshell, is the history of how we have information for God Speaks. But as I say, Baba was intent on giving this in an outward form as a way for us to keep our minds in tow so that the heart can be expressed in full. Develop a perspective so we can properly focus on the real thing. Be free of distractions. What if this? What if that? We don't have to be concerned. People, seekers, all over, spiritual seekers, they call themselves spiritual seekers all over the world, have all these questions. We don't have any questions with Baba. The question is, oh, I haven't read that yet. He's given so much information. Baba has said, I've given you more than you can. He would tell people, just read God Speaks. There's enough in there for you now. In 700 years, maybe I'll give you more. God Speaks was not the final thing. By the end of Baba's life, he said, you know, in God Speaks, I explained about the perfect masters, but it wasn't complete. Francis, you'll have to do more on that. I'll tell you. Then Baba dropped his body, and Francis said, well, don't have to do that now. But he'll probably have to do it when he comes back. If he becomes perfect, then he'll have to elucidate on that subject. Why do I mention that? In God Speaks, you know, Baba explains about the perfect ages in between the Avataric Advents, 11 of them. If we divide that mathematically, very rarely we know that perfect masters stayed in their body that long. Few did, but not many. So there's something with the perfect age and who follows the perfect master after he drops his body until the next perfect age. So there's something there. That math wasn't fully explained. A few other little things. Baba said, you know, I talked about the dangers of the fourth plane. It should be done better. Let's do it over. All of these things are there. Why? He's trying to use language. And all during those periods of his explanations, he further elucidated and developed the lexicon based upon people's ability to understand. We have to know this through language. Everything happens through language, so we're already limited. And we're reminded of a comment Upasya Maharaj made. Yes, I've become God, the truth. But when I try to explain it to you, I have to use language, and in that very act of using language, it's not there anymore. It's only our capacity. That's all. So Baba has assured us that his real work is to awaken and not to teach. And that's happening simultaneously as we do all of these things. The mystery book, is that lost? Well, we don't say it's lost. It's not found. And yes, there was a whole history of that. We were talking about it the other day. Don Stevens was big on finding the book after Baba dropped his body. So he started going through the channels, who knew what last, and he traced it down to Elizabeth Patterson, who apparently returned it to India when she went there for the East-West Gathering in 1962. And so she told Don, yes, I carried the book back to India in 1962. Yes, yes, and I gave it to that man. Yes, yes, who is it? That nice man. You know, what was his name? Anyway. Man. Yes.
Use the alphabet board to write Godspeak, or was he writing it?
Good question, because I didn't mention that. He dictated the most of it on the board. However, he dropped the board on October 7th, 1954. So the supplement for God Speaks was done through gestures. Now, Erich would tell us, so here we are, now Bob has dropped the board. And we're all just sitting there with him, and we're looking at him, and he's looking at us. What do we do? It went on like that. And Bob, if he wanted something, he would. Then he developed those gestures for the word. So, you know, A and then B. But there weren't there wasn't a sign for F. Bob never made an F. And you can see this when you see the film, Louis Van Gasteren's film. I forget what it's named. Anyway, Louis Van Gasteren's film, the finest quality film that was ever made of Baba, 1967. Erich is reading Baba's gestures, and you can see the focus, the concentration it required to read Baba's gestures. And at a certain point, he's reading Baba's gestures, Baba's communicating something, and Erich is going F, 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 to add the letter and get the rest of the word. It was like that, Erich said. Interesting. Why? We don't know. But he had all those. Yes. Yes. Tiffin lectures also mentioned that. But going back then to this, what was the question again? We're going back to the question. Pardon? The board. Oh, what I wanted to finish to tell you was this. So Baba was dictating the supplement for God Speaks. And this is also the period during his messages for manifestation. So Baba was really focused on that work, simultaneously in that period dictating the supplement for God Speaks. What device did he use? Bauko Churi, stand there. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay. One letter at a time, per word. Can you imagine the patience? What a tedious process that was. And bow. Again, A, B, C, D. For every word, every letter of every word sometimes, until they got the word, say the word. It was kind of like a game show, guess the word. So then, where's Tiffin lectures? It was like this. Towards the end of those, let's say we call them, for a lack of a better word in English, metaphysical explanations that Baba was giving, he was also giving explanations to the Mandali, lifestyle, behavior, what I expect from you, discipline, all of those things, stories. Those things were a separate body of work which came to be published as the Tiffin Lectures. This is now the last part of the first long stay, the end of 1926, the last half of, starting earlier, but mostly the later part of 1926, or later part of the first long stay at least. That's what the group of discourses that we have in the Tiffin Lectures is, like that. So they're of the same period, And Baba was, now, when Baba would give those, In that 17-month period, when he was communicating by writing, he would primarily do that on a slate with chalk. Never waste paper. Although we do have some examples of Baba writing on paper, mostly communicated on slate with chalk. The Hajar Babajan school was functioning then. They had plenty of slates with chalk, and one person's responsibility was to carry a gunny bag full of slates with chalk and erasers. So his job was, Baba would write on the slate. One of the mandali would read it, let's say Vishnu. Chanji would quickly write it down, hand the slate back to this person whose responsibility it was, who would quickly wipe that slate and put it in the pile. And in that way, Baba would continue to give these discourses, and this is how they managed that work.
Oh, why didn't you just continue writing own words on paper?
Because Baba's silence was a constant exercise in intensifying his silence. So while he spent that rare period of 17 months communicating by writing, didn't want to continue doing that. He wanted them, we're getting into another topic here, which is Baba's silence and the effects of that on his disciples, which was demanding a tremendous focus, attentiveness, concentration from them to be able to be his attendants in his communication. Imagine how intense that could be compared to other Advents with his circle. They had to have their focus right there to absorb what he was communicating. Attentiveness. Some of them were very good. Some of them, many of them, like Jal could read the board from upside down from across the room. They were good at it. They had become practiced. So Baba went. What happened is he stopped writing beginning of 1927. And then he started pointing to letters on a newspaper. And Vishnu immediately had the idea, this is a little bit clumsy. So he made an alphabet board with those letters clipped out, pasted them onto a piece of cardboard. An English alphabet with numbers and all that, and a few other things. And then they started making some better boards, painted with the letters, the numbers, all that on them. So Baba started doing that and became this is what he kept. The point came up the other day, talking about the intensification of Baba's silence. He stopped reading by 1948. Now he's not only not writing, he stopped writing when he started using the alphabet board also, except for signing his name or drawing a figure. He stopped reading also himself by 1948. So therefore somebody had to also read his correspondence, the newspaper, anything. Then in 1954, he dropped the alphabet board and started the system of communicating with his own gestures. So all these years, he is giving a promise to break us up soon. I'm going to break my silence. And instead, he's intensifying his silence. Yes. Rose, did you have a question?
Bob said that next to God Speaks, Stay with God was the most important book.
Yes.
And I know Ward's been doing something, editing or exactly is Ward doing with Stay with God?
Well, what Ward is doing, I think, with Stay with God is there's been a call to reprint that. I don't think he's making much in the way of adjustments there. No. And why did Baba say that? Remember at the time, there weren't that many pieces of, we remember 50 years ago, we didn't have that much to read. We had discourses, God Speaks, Francis wrote Stay with God. What's beautiful about it is Francis's writing style. We were talking about that the other night. It is poetic prose. Francis is regarded as a poet. He wasn't really a poet per se, but his prose was absolutely poetic. His ability to express the subject was sublime. Baba loved that. That's what Baba loved. He got better as he got older. But really speaking, he didn't have to be a poet, had the structure of poetry to express himself. He was so good at it naturally because he was really an old connected soul with Baba. So Baba Stay with God was published after God Speaks, and in those days there were only those really. You had discourses, which then was still in the 5 volumes, and you had God Speaks, and you had Stay with God. This is up until 1962, 63 really. We didn't have much more. We had little things, Life at its Best and all that. So bring it into context. That's why Baba said at the time, after God Speaks, it's his favorite. Mm-hmm. Listen, Humanity is good. Listen, Humanity, of course, is Don Stevens' record of his trip in 1955. What's good about Listen, Humanity is also that there were specific discourses given in there, which you also won't find in other places. Some information, very fascinating things too. These are largely, though, redos of messages Baba gave in the 40s or earlier in the 50s. They were given to Don Stevens for editing. These are messages that were given to the men during the 55 Sahavas program. You remember in the month of November, for each week, a different language group was coming to stay at Meherabode and be in the Sahavas of Baba. So Baba didn't just sit there, as I say, them looking at him, he's looking at them. So to pass time, he would also have a message read, different things. And these, many of the things in Listen Humanity were messages that were given to the groups in a less edited form and translated into their languages. So that the body of those discourses was given to Don to include the second part of Listen Humanity. Listen Humanity has some very nice discourses, yeah. There's another one, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Listen to Don Stevens mention that Baba planted equivalent spiritual bombs in many of Baba's words, writings, and books.
Yes.
Do you know whether Baba would have mentioned this or another time?
Baba mentioned that the atom bombs were in his words, and Don had a personal experience of those atom bombs, specifically in God Speaks. This should not be interpreted as those other pieces of work are meaningless. That is misleading. All of Baba's words and explanations have great impact. And he said as much. You can find his explanation about that in discourses. His words were not nothing. All of these have great meaning. They do. They're words from Meher Baba. And as I said the other day, Meher Baba in his explanations, he never said, theoretically, perhaps, maybe. No, you don't find those words in his explanations. He's direct, concise, to the point. He speaks from his authority. He speaks from his authority of all-knowingness. So yes, the atom bomb is there, but you know, Don had this thing that, well, the atom bomb is only in these portions of God's. No, that's not. Baba put his name on the book. The supplement was presented. It's not for, this is in the supplement, Divine Theme. Baba gave this himself. You mean that's not his part of his atom bomb of consciousness to come? This is the foundation of it, Divine Theme. It's important to make sure that we don't lose context. This is from Baba, all of these things, yes. That's a good point you bring up, because what he said was, I'll give you 10% of the book. And because he said, generally 90% of what I wrote in the book is in God Speaks. So we make the assumption that the last 10%, but he didn't exactly say that. However, through the years, Baba made comments about the content of his hidden book. And according to those comments, there must be a lot more that is in there, information that we don't have yet. We'll see. Might be before then. But all of these things have to come out in his time. It's every once in a while something happens and we say, well, look at that surprise. Okay, that's time for that. Yes. Yes. Right. And then there's God Speaks. It's all, how could anybody ever explain that better than Meher Baba? It's there.
Two
Yes.
more Zoom questions. One is, where was the first explanation or original documentation of the 276 gaps?
The first well, okay, Baba mentioned that. Yes. You wanted to know where is the first documented recording of Baba mentioning the 276 gaseous forms. We have to go back to Baba's explanations to the ashram boys to get the first hint of that. However, the record of explanations Baba gave at Meherabode in May of 1934, you find that specific number and further explanations. Baba also elucidated further on those points in coming years, making it clear that, he put it this way, the ordinary human mind can only understand the most gross 7 forms of those 276 gaseous forms. So mostly these are subtle things. We're talking about from the point of creation to the electron. And the final form, in Baba's explanations, is the first atom, hydrogen. That's the most gross of those 276 forms. So imagine what that means. Baba used the word gaseous in the English language. Why? We don't have a better word. Just don't have it. So we've stuck with that term. Baba used it. He could, yes, he said he could have used ethereal and different things, but that has it had a different connotation due to spiritualism. So Baba stuck with the technical term gaseous. That's why we have that. Yes, so there is an example that we were speaking of. There's a discrepancy about this time thing, but that perfect age you're talking about in a period when the avatar comes in 700 years, 63, 65 years, say. The term of a perfect master in a perfect age. So there are, as Bob explained, 11 perfect ages between avataric advents. 5 perfect masters in each of those ages. After 55 comes 56. There's that number again. 56, the avatar. Now, what I mentioned was puzzling is that term, 65 years. First of all, that's a long time. Yes, some perfect masters have lived that long, but even in the example of Baba's own, there was only Babajan, Sai Baba were a long time. Nordeen Maharaj was almost that long. Upasi Maharaj wasn't that long. Tajuddin Baba was long, not quite that long, it seems. That's okay, it's the 11th perfect age. Nordeen Maharaj was the last of the 55 from the Prophet Muhammad to Meher Baba. Then officially began the first perfect age of the next advent. So during the avatar's physical lifetime, there's an overlap when those ages begin. It's like that. But then the discrepancy is, how about the period when the avatar comes in 1400 years? And that term is 130 years. What do we say about that? That's the thing that Baba didn't explain, that he told Francis, we need further explanation on this. How does this work? Because we know there were those. I'll tell you an example. Baba said Ramana Maharshi was a rare type of perfect master. He had duty but no circle. It's a rare thing, it seems. But he may have been one of those who supplemented the perfect age after, let's say, Sai Baba dropped his body. Could have been. We don't know. We don't know these things, but because Baba could only give humanity enough. If he gave too much information, it would have been just too convoluted for the average people to absorb that. Everything he has given in this age, now I'm reminded from time to time about the passage in Scripture of the Bible where the disciples asked Christ, please explain to us about the kingdom of heaven. And his response was, how can I explain that to you when you don't even understand the world here? But this age is different. So Baba had said, now Sufism is a branch of knowledge, study, discipleship in esoteric mysticism. Baba said Sufism began with Muhammad and ends with, Sufism began with Zoroaster and ends with Muhammad. So what about this age then? That means mystical knowledge is not esoteric anymore. It is available for everyone. Anyone who has the inclination, he is given it readily. And because we have all of these forms of expression, it's readily available. All that has to happen is that individuals have to focus their attention on it. But there are too many distractions for the average person to be able to do that. They're just not ready. That's where we are with it. I don't even remember what your question was. Did I do like Bao? Did I just do like Bao and just? Okay. Yes, fascinating, isn't it? And people read that and say, oh, this is repetitive and boring. What is he doing? He creates. So the question was, he reads God Speaks, and he sees that Baba seems to be explaining the same point again in the next chapter in a different way slightly. But what happened? Wasn't the editing?
Hello?
Why are they repeating these
Listen,
points?
I'm listening.
This
I'm
is not a
listening.
novel.
Okay, goodbye.
It is more like a meditation on information. It repeats itself. Baba begins by giving us a perspective, a verbal picture. You get an understanding from this angle. Next chapter, now he's talking about something from the perspective of the soul this way. And now look at it again from here. And this repeats. There's the connection. It works like that. Again, a few chapters more, he's repeating that same theme. Why? Because now he's giving us a picture from a different angle, to develop a different perspective to complete that notion of how it is all interconnected. It all works in those ways. That's how we have that repetitive. Now people who are used to reading, they had a difficult time with God Speaks because of the construction of the presentation. You have to consider the body of information on the subject. That's what it is about. It is, it's about allowing people to absorb that and develop their own personal perspective. Yeah. It's not a novel. No. You could say it is, if you're willing to look at it that way. It's the novel of the soul, the long journey of the soul returning to the source. It's not fiction, though, it's nonfiction. Yes, we have that on record. Those are there until some young people in Los Angeles get involved in movie things. You know, they could bring that out. Nowadays, with all the potential in all of these things, because Bob had talked about special effects. That was one of the things he stressed in this film. Special effects will be able to express these ideas. Yes, fascinating. Well, they're both important. I won't say anyone is more important. I don't do that. If Bob gave these explanations, they're both of great importance, very great importance. So we shouldn't think of things like that and rush to try and relax, absorb it carefully. You develop your own big picture of these things, and everything falls into place nicely. So creation and its causes is a group of discourses that Bob gave to the Meher Ashram boys on the hill at Meherabode during that very special time. And that group, as Ramju had said in 1929, it's a group of explanations, very unique. It's a foundation for many of those further explanations also. It's also, there are points in creation and its causes that he had already expressed in the intelligence notebooks from the previous stay at Meherabode too. He continues. These things are all linked. The information is linked. It's just that the progression of the expression of these ideas gets further developed as years go by. Divine Theme came in 1943. I want to tell you an interesting point about Divine Theme. When all the men, 140 plus men, were called to Meherabode, as I say, they were just very happy to be able to be invited to spend time with Baba, but he called them for this specific purpose. He wanted to use their individual minds to focus on this for his work. But when he introduced the Divine Theme, he said, during this stay, I'm going to show you this work. I first started expressing this concept when I was still coming down from the God realization state. You know, Babajan had kissed him on the forehead. He experienced infinite bliss and stopped sleeping and eating for 9 months. And then gradually he started coming down. He went to visit the perfect masters. Upasi Maharaj threw the rock and hit him on the forehead. He said, when that happened, I read this once. He said, at that moment, 3/4 of world consciousness returned to me. But it was that last quarter that was most difficult that he had to bring. That was difficult. But at that time, he had that much, and he was going through this process of Upasi Maharaj still bringing him down. He said, when I worked as a school teacher in Gujarat, this is, you know, Baba's mother was very intent on him being normal. She didn't understand what was going on, just wanted him to be normal. He was a bright young guy. He went to Gujarat to be a school teacher. It's like a substitute school teacher in 1916. Now he's 22 years old. So he said, when I was teaching school in Gujarat in 1916, I began expressing this divine theme on the chalkboard. So people also had the concept, Meher Baba must be like a philosopher, thinker, and he gradually developed his thoughts and expressed them carefully. No, he wasn't not a thinking mind. He had infinite consciousness, and this is the proof. He said, when I was teaching school in Gujarat in 1916, I started expressing on the chalkboard this whole panorama of the divine theme. Can you imagine if you're a student? If you're in 7th grade and Mr. Irani? So that was an interesting point to me to hear that, just validates that point about all-knowing nature. Yes. Yes. Baba would tell some, read it this many, just read that, he would say. I want you to read it 7 times. He told his niece, Shireen, don't read God Speaks. And as she says, well, that's one of the easiest orders Bob ever gave me. Take a deep breath and say, Baba, and start. So here's what Baba has explained about all the things you have just attempted to articulate. He explained very early about the yogas. Yogas means the effort to work towards truth. There are 3 basic yogas. There's also another yoga beyond that, but the 3 basic yogas are karma yoga, which is service, bhakti yoga, which is devotion. That's the love, expression of love. So one practical service. That means service to God, selfless service, but mostly service to God. The highest is service to the master, the perfect master. If you can get connected to the perfect master, there's nothing higher than that. Bhakti, devotion, expressing love, music, poetry, all of that to stir the heart. And the other, which is difficult, is called Jnana Yoga, which is meditation in general. But there, as Bob has explained in discourses, in 8 chapters, different types of meditation, including in that definition as is reading the works of the masters. It's a type of meditation, and he explains that it is the best general meditation to read the works of the perfect masters. But he says specifically of the masters of your age, and most specifically, the avatar.